Today is February 8th, 2015, and I was not planning to make a video today, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about Brian Haines and touch on a little bit what I already talked about with regard to the last video clip that mentioned him and Holly Weiss, who was Holly Myers before she was a Weiss. And one of the things that I mentioned in the last video was, I don't know that it matters that much to clarify this, but I said that I was in this class with some gifted kids, and we had to construct an architectural design. And then I also then mentioned later one of the Bob Garretts or my dad or whoever came over to me and gave me a very nice and expensive kind of ship model thing and wanted me to try to put it together in this bottle. And anyway, what I wanted to distinguish between the two of them is that the architectural thing was something that we had to design on our own. So I had to come up with the idea of the building, and then I had to put it together. And then this ship thing was one of those pre-assemble types of things. Like, you know, you had to follow the directions and assemble it, and it's more about your craftsmanship, not so much about your creativity. And I remember at the time I kind of wondered, why is this such a big deal that my dad wants me to do this? And I didn't want to do it because I thought it wasn't very creative, because it was just putting things together that someone had already thought of. And but you know, I have no idea, but it could have been that it was another one of the government's tests. Possibly, I mean, they were always testing me for various things, and they were using me a lot for different things as well. I was never getting paid, I was never getting credit for any of it, but wherever they thought they could use me, they did. And I kind of wonder if it wasn't just something that someone thought would be a good idea, or wanted to use to show I was maybe a perfectionist or something, and that I could do it. You know, possibly it was one of those things because it was an adult model set. It was for people who were very skilled and did that kind of thing all the time. And I was a kid. So possibly it was like a kind of test of, you know, could I follow directions and assemble this little ship in a bottle. And on the other hand, it may have been a test to see how detail-oriented I could be with things like really very, very, very small pieces in assembly and that kind of thing, because I know that the government sometimes used women, and at one time I had someone tell me that they needed electricians and people to do very fine manual kinds of skills that required a lot of sensitivity. I mean, for example, sometimes bomb dismantling required a kind of finesse, like a manual type of finesse, and then of course surgical applications. You know, when you're doing surgery, if you're a good surgeon, typically you have a skill of being able to use tools, and sometimes doing very small, detailed kinds of work on the human body. And you know, it requires brains and it requires education, but it also does, you know, in that kind of field, it does require a little bit of a talent in, I think, coordination and finesse, which I don't usually have my hair down, and I have my hair down and it's wet. I started thinking of the shampoo, the finesse shampoo. Anyway, but anyway, so I kind of think, I'm not sure, you know, what somebody was getting at, because I had been approached at one time about being trained to be a secret military surgeon, like one that didn't, and then I guess they were then saying that I could make a living out of it. So I don't know how secret it was going to end up being in the long run, because I'm not quite sure how I'd be making a living doing that if it wasn't something that, that I was getting paid above the board for, not under the table or anything. And I was told I could support a family doing that. And it was a government group that presented that idea to me. So, it's possible that that kind of a task that someone wanted me to do had something to do with that. But at the time, as a kid, I just thought, I didn't think about that. And I just thought, I don't want to do that. Like, doesn't look like something I want to do. And I thought it was sort of dumbing me down, because I wasn't actually creating something first and then assembling it. So I maybe had the wrong idea about it. But anyway, that was, it was something that I was asked to do, and it did have to do with other gifted kids, because they were doing it too. The architectural assembly and creation, at least. And Brian Haines was part of this whole group. And when I was living in Moses Lake, Washington, how did I know this kid over in Oregon? Well, I knew all these different kids over in Oregon, and sometimes they went back and forth between Washington and Oregon. And what kind of a group was this? Like, what kinds of kids were they? I mean, like, were they all with the same agency? I have no idea, because no one said repeatedly to me, this is FBI, or the FBI needs this, or it's military and the military needs this. And I was meeting all kinds of government officials. I met people from the CIA who didn't mind telling me they were CIA. I met people who were CIA who I later found out were CIA, who never disclosed that information to me, but like it later came out and then I found out. I was meeting FBI people all the time, going into their offices, and military people all the time. And then a lot of various other people who were government connected, and I didn't always know what they did. So in that context, I actually, I didn't remember this Brian Haines person when he was later, he started working at this gas station that was right next to my house, where I was renting a room from the Myers family. And I already described how I had met the Myers family when I was a little kid too. And actually, from what I remember, when I was at the Myers house, the dad's house over on the beach, the coast, from what I recall, a judge showed up there. He let a judge into that house, into his house. It was his, private, kind of small cabin type of a deal. And I believe, from what I remember, that one of the individuals he allowed into his house to have contact with me was a judge, possibly a coastal judge. And why was that? And then it was again some kind of form of torture and assault. And when I think about, why was he inviting, or this judge into the house and everything, and I think that it possibly had something to do with this whole idea of that I might that they expected me to become pregnant, because everyone knew I wanted to have a kid so badly, and I wanted to have it by, I knew what artificial means were. I'd been around people who had that process done, and I was completely accepting of it. And I was very serious. I well, if I set my mind to something that I wanted to do, and I really thought it was a good idea, of course, sometimes I changed my mind or I realized, oh, this is not a good idea. But in certain situations, I never backed down. And like even decades later, I still felt the same way. So there were parts of my personality and things that I wanted in life that were already very well developed by the time I was very young. And I think they knew that, and I think that they felt that they could count on that. And so they put this little plan into action of, okay, well, if she goes here, who do we have in place or in position? If I recused somebody over in Coos Bay, then who did they have over on the beach? The next county over, or did a change of venue. If I went to Portland, who did they have over there? And I did meet judges that were in Portland too. And actually, yeah, it never did go to Portland, but I later had a case, when I was older as an adult, that didn't have to do with my personal problems with that kind of thing at that time. It was more to do with color of law and defamation with police when I did a protest because of some slander and monk-related things. And when I got involved with that, I did see a couple of the same judges that I had been introduced to when I was a little girl, when I was young. So they did have some people already in place who were there and who already knew who I was, and they had met me when I was a kid. One of the judges I distinctly remember is Janet Wilson, and she wasn't the only one that was there. And then the other odd thing was that some of the lawyers on the opposing side, they were lawyers that I had already met. I mean, I had stayed at Dick Whittemore's house as a kid. He played piano, he had a big dog, and I stayed at his house. And then I was meeting John Kempf too. After that, I was at his apartment, and or at an apartment where he was also present. I wouldn't say it was his apartment necessarily, because there were a bunch of different aged men there, like young kids, teens, and a couple of older men. So I actually don't know whose apartment it was, but I know John Kempf was there. So then later, when I'm an adult and here I am in Portland and having a case with judges that I've already seen before, I mean, I didn't know it or think about it at the time. Like through the entirety of those cases, I didn't think about that. Anyway, and then one of the lawyers on the cases, they're lawyers that I've already met. It's just a little bit unusual.